So in our final in-person conversation, we have a fireside chat on coordinated approaches for AI governance. We'll introduce first our moderator, Nicolas Moës, Director of European AI Governance and incoming Executive Director of the Future Society, yay, with Dr. Lynne Parker, Associate Vice Chancellor and Director of the AI Tennessee Initiative at University of Tennessee, and Marek Havrda, Office of the Government of the Czech Republic. And before they speak, we'll hear first from Dragoș Tudorache, who was planning to join but couldn't make it, member of the European Parliament.
Good afternoon. Many thanks to the Future Society for inviting me to this Athens Roundtable. Ironically, the reasons why I cannot be with you in Washington is because I'm on my way to Washington. I will attend the Transatlantic Legislators Dialogue later today and tomorrow. And of course, one of the important topics on our agenda in our dialogue of legislators, Congress and European Parliament will inevitably be artificial intelligence. But back to the discussion today, I was asked to address 3 points: the status of negotiations on the European AI Act, the future of the governance of the AI office that we will put in place under this act, and also a bit of a broader reflection on global governance on artificial intelligence and possibly the role that our act will play in setting the boundaries for such global governance. Let's start with the state of play. We have a next trilogue, the negotiation between the 2 co-legislators and the European Commission. We have it scheduled for the 6th of December, so literally some days away. It is possible that this will be the last trilogue. At least the 3 institutions are committed to make this the last trilogue, no matter how long it's going to take. But there is also a chance that we will not be wrapping up because there will be possibly remaining points open. One of the important debate that we still have is on foundation models. I know that this is also an area, a topic that interests you. I can't give you much in terms of details of the discussion because it's still very fluid. Suffice to say that we are now struggling to find the right balance between over-regulating and under-regulating, between the kind of differentiation that we need to make within the broader breed of foundation models, because we understand that we cannot unnecessarily put burden on some models that are not prone to risks, but also for those that are likely to cause risk because of the way they are trained, because of the way they are being deployed, and because the way that those models are being used for applications down the value chain. There are obligations, there are key elements of accountability that need to be put in place. But again, how do we make a differentiation? What kind of criteria we use? These are some of the big debates and questions that we still have unanswered, and for which we try to find the right solutions before the next trilogue. It's not simple. Politically, it's also complicated by the fact that also within the European Council, there are different diverging views between some of the governments in the Council, and the Presidency is trying to rally all the points and come with a coherent approach to discuss with us as Parliament. In Parliament, we are pretty solid in our majority as to how we see the need for regulating foundation models, and also some of the solutions that we kept proposing based on our original mandate. But we remain, of course, constructive in our negotiations and are looking forward to find the common ground with the Council. So that's where we are, very much still an open debate. We'll see on the 6th of December how much we progress. In terms of governance, also an open point, but the solution is more or less quasi-agreed in terms of the need to set up a European-level governance. It's less important how we'll end up calling it. Most likely we'll call it an AI office, but we'll see. The important thing is the kind of competences that we're going to entrust with this office, and there seems to be now a majority shaping up and a shared understanding between Council and Parliament that we want to give important tasks to this office, because we recognize that some of the enforcement, some of the governance that we want to put in place, among others, for foundation models, can only be done at European level by a special body. Again, we'll see where we place it, but clearly by a special body that will need to have the right expertise, the right budget, the right tools to make sure that this enforcement is one that makes sense in terms of the objectives that we will set for it. Third point, global governance. Of course, a lot has been happening over the last couple of months at the global level with the G7 Code of Conduct, with an important discussion in London at the Safety Summit. So I think we have the embryo of a global effort in terms of putting in place the right governance around artificial intelligence. It has focused a lot, this global conversation, on foundational models, or what others call even frontier models. But in Europe, we believe that the same global conversation is to be held also on the other risks that are associated with AI, not only with the, let's say, cutting edge or the existential threats, as some of the conversation seems to be focusing on right now. And I think inevitably the governance that we'll put in place here at the European level, since it's going to be the first hard law on AI, is going to at least, if not set the model, but start the conversation about the future models and inevitably influence that conversation, which means that we have an additional burden of responsibility on our shoulders when we negotiate now, understanding that, again, the solutions that we found will likely influence the more global conversation. So these are a bit the parameters of our work, where we stand right now. I remain confident that by the end of the year, there will be white smoke coming out of these negotiations, and there'll be clarity as to the directions that we are taking. Thank you very much. I wish you an interesting and good debate forward, and looking forward possibly to a future meeting where I will be able to be with you and discuss live. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Dragoș and to his team, of course, for sending us these remarks. Like, the online participation was very, as he explained, coincidentally, he's flying right now to Washington, D.C., so he couldn't be on stage with us. But speaking of online participation, we have several hundreds people watching us right now. So like the eyes of the world are on us. So quickly announcing that there is a poll going up now, which is, the question will be like, in which area will the EU shape AI development and governance? And there are a few options. And then the second question is, in which area will the US shape AI development and governance? So to our online attendees, we are really looking forward to hear your views on that. But for now, Lynne, Marek, thanks very much for joining me on stage. As Dragoș mentioned, right, like the EU AI Act negotiations are approach their conclusion. So I'd be very much keen to hear, Marek, during the discussions, in particular, like, you know, what were the major challenges for you, and are there any lessons learned, right, for the US as it embarks on its own journey, in order to perhaps like set the stage here, like what were the major challenges of the discussion on the AI Act?
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's great to be here. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit jet lagged. The other thing is I lost my voice, probably from the meetings with the US government yesterday. I have to say I'm speaking now in the personal capacity, and I can give you some kind of overview of the challenges as I noticed them over the years the AI has been in making. More, of course, during our presidency, which was last year, and we managed to get so-called general approach, which is the agreement of the member states. We managed to get it as a consensus, so there was full support of that document at that moment. But of course, a lot has happened since then, or at least a lot has been understood since then, I would say better. I think the first thing, the first challenge is the risk-based approach itself, actually. Most of us agree that this is the approach, this is how we should take it, how we should go forward. But if we define the risk that there is the impact element and combined with the probability, we don't have any of these for most of these risks. If you look at the impact assessment document, this is kind of the evidence-based document for legislation in the EU context, and I've been working a lot with that context in my previous lives. The document is quite patchy. There are some anecdotal evidences about the impacts. So I think this is first thing. We need to be working much more of understanding the impacts in terms not only incidents, but impacts on individuals and societies, and maybe I will talk about it later. It's one thing. Second has been, for me, an important issue is really the potential AI will manipulate humans beyond our abilities, conscious abilities, beyond abusing the cognitive biases. And probably Gary could talk to it much more deeper. I was just involved in the European Commission in my previous life on the behavior insights. So it comes from there. And the potential, I think, is huge. We put it in the UNESCO recommendation as well. The Commission put it into among the banned uses of AI. Both the member states as well as the Parliament, we enlarged the scope of that provision, and I think it will be a really challenge to enforce it, to understand what it is. It now includes basically ban on manipulating your behavior beyond your consciousness, using manipulative techniques, and ban when it leads to significant harms. And I think we will need to define all this. Interestingly, I think there's not enough discussion on that because this is a ban. This is a hard thing. There is no way out of it. Other area I think is of course foundation models. I think we working on it at a very late moment. The Czech presidency worked on what the French brought in, the general purpose AI systems. And now the approach is rather different. And we will see if there is a consensus at the end. Just in terms of timing, there was a COREPER yesterday, and there is one tomorrow, which is actually exactly on that area. So we will see if the representatives, the permanent representatives of the member states will green light the presidency for the compromise with the parliament. On the foundation models. It is more or less going in line a lot with the codes of conduct developed through the Hiroshima process, G7, which I think is a great approach. There are requirements for transparency, but there are requirements for systems with so-called systemic risk, or models with so-called systemic risks to be bigger, much bigger than for transparency requirements, much more going into really the code of conduct. And there, I think it will be really difficult to define what the systemic risk is again here in this very case, and then to kind of strike this right balance, because there's kind of a juggling with the voluntary code, but making it basically mandatory if the Commission decides it needs to be done so. And I think this will bring lots of legal uncertainty to the whole situation. And that takes me to maybe, not maybe the last, but one before the last challenge. And this is really this need to have agility and flexibility of regulation. In contrast to the need for the legal certainty to business operators, which we all need, not to stifle innovation. And exactly like that uncertainty could induce could be kind of a break in the innovative efforts. Here the draft AI Act comes with so-called implementing and delegated acts, and not much has been discussed because this will be super important pieces of the secondary legislation, both in terms of what the definition of high-risk systems, as well as I mentioned, if the foundation models go forth. Just to finish with one thing, I think one of the major challenges is actually not to get the discussion hijacked by something what people understand. There was a good comment, people measure what they are able to measure in the morning, and I very much subscribe to it. I think in the political discussions at this level, a lot of attention is being paid to something people understand, are able to grapple with, and this been the carve-outs for the security uses of AI, which took lots of attention, and from my perspective, of course, being utmost important, but maybe there are other very important things as well. So not to get the discussions hijacked that direction sometimes.
Okay, thanks for that. That's well noted. And so, Lynne, I suppose like the reverse question would be like, what can the US learn from the EU regulatory journey as it embarks on its own journey? Marek, you mentioned the risk-based approach. Like, where does the risk-based approach align and diverge from the US own strategy or like ambitions when it comes to AI governance? Do you?
Yeah, so I think certainly the EU deserves a lot of credit for putting out a draft EU AI regulation. I think it's something that it very much accelerated the conversation around how do we regulate AI in the United States. That conversation I don't think would have started when it did if that draft had not been out there. And I think, we all know those first drafts are much easier to work from than getting a first draft to begin with. So I think that has helped accelerate the conversation. Of course, the conversation has been going on for a while, and people are wondering, well, what does it mean for the United States, and how do we think about regulation? I think at the thematic level, I think there is a lot of agreement on, in the EU and the US on those areas like regulation should be based on impacts to humans. We talk a lot about the risk-based approaches, and I think there's certainly a lot of agreement on that. There's agreement that we need to collaborate. Agreement that we need to think about transparency and responsibility. So I think there are a lot of those kinds of themes that are very consistent, and certainly the EU AI Act shows one way to begin to achieve those themes. I think if you think about maybe how the U.S. approach will be distinctive, I think what we will find here in the United States is, in some sense, I think our regulatory, our agencies, our infrastructure kind of around how our institutions are set up at the federal level is particularly well suited for AI regulation, in that we have a lot of regulatory agencies that have kind of constrained sector-specific roles, authorities on how you think about regulation in those use cases, because that use case-based approach that the EU has talked about certainly resonates on the U.S. side as well. And so how do you implement a use-based, sector-specific regulatory regime? And I think the U.S. Having different regulatory agencies for different sectors is very well suited for that kind of regulation. And so these are agencies that have deep expertise in certain maybe economic sectors or application domains, and then they can take the regulatory regimes that already, or regulatory approaches that already exist, and tweak those as needed or add to them substantially according to what's needed for AI. And so I think structurally, the implementation will look different because of how the U.S. is kind of set up in a way that's quite fairly ideal, I think, in my perspective, of setting up a regulatory approach to AI. I think certainly there's a desire to have consistency, and so I think that'll be maybe a difference in how that's achieved. As I think of it, I think of the EU AI Act as being a little bit more of kind of an umbrella top-down kind of approach for AI, even though it talks about sector-specific, but the overall approach is kind of a top-down sort of approach. And on the U.S. side, I think it's every agency that has regulatory authorities is going to be thinking about regulation of AI in that sector. Well, as you see, for instance, from the President's executive order, AI executive order, it gives very specific directives to all of these different agencies. The challenge is going to be, how do you have consistency there? Because there will be certain use cases that may be under one regulatory agency that have some similarities to another use case under a different regulatory authority. And you certainly want predictability for industry and similar kinds of uses, but maybe they end up with very different regulatory approaches. So I think that's the challenge that we'll have to address.
Yeah, I think like one of the ideas that have been brought up by the Biden administration actually was the US AI Safety Institute, perhaps to have something a bit more horizontal, and actually to guide risk management for the foundation models at least, which are then built upon for the sectoral applications in many cases. So Marek, actually, like we have discussed on the other side of the Atlantic, this AI office for a long time, right? Do you think the AI office will be given like a similar mandate as the US AI Safety Institute, or what other responsibilities will there be, like for the question of implementation that Lynne brought up and the consistency? Like, do you know about that?
Yeah, well,
briefly?
I think the question of the AI office is directly connected, at least for some member states, with the regulation of foundation models over general purpose AI. If it goes forward in the final compromise, then we might see something like the AI office. From my perspective, the major argument is we will need lots of expertise and talent, which we just don't have in the capitals in the EU 27, and we don't have it probably even in Brussels at the moment. So it should be, in my view, the major hub. You concentrate the expertise on the regulation. The other area, the other part that I think it should work on is something what I would call the regulatory learning. We have put that text actually as a presidency into the AI Act regarding the sandboxes. So there are the sandboxes for the high-risk systems, regulatory sandboxes, and one of their raison d'etre should be regulatory learning. So in my view, the AI office would be well placed to kind of gather all that intelligence or that knowledge and put it together and help us to define things. And of course, at the end, you will need the coordination, something like you need to do across different fields, inside a field. But of course, like in our case, if there is kind of like this dual system to the implementation, so you would have still the capitals to implement the high-risk system regulation. So you will need coordination. In the current draft, it has been put into the remit of the AI board. We will see how this everything gets together. In my view, maybe some more discussion on kind of like streamlining the regulatory part of the Act might be useful.
Yeah, I see. Thanks. And actually, like this notion of regulatory learning kind of is necessary in the sense like innovation is often outpacing regulation. We have actually like heard from the previous panel about like it's even kind of like outpacing corporate governance, right, with the failure of Bing Chat. And yet, like on the panel just before that, we heard like one of these major provider or like the Google Cloud, like kind of almost denying any form of risk from these models. So it does seem that like corporate governance, for example, is failing because of this race towards generality, right? That is underway, at least in the context of foundation models. So how can we, and this is more for you, Lynne, right? Like how can we find a way to in a way to incorporate safety by design into these foundation models, or to make developers incorporate safety by design into these foundation models, even though it might mean actually like self-constraining or like constraining these models' capabilities? Do you have any kind of hints of what the US could consider to kind of rein in these providers?
So, certainly I think making clear what expectations are is an important start. We've talked a lot about a number of different governance goals and desires, but as has been mentioned, a lot of times we don't know how to achieve those. And I think this is what I'm hearing from industry is that they really want to know what are the expectations. It's been mentioned that a number of these technology companies have said regulate us, and part of that is because they want to know what the expectations are, what are the rules of the road. And so I think when we think about incentivizing these kinds of behaviors, certainly companies by and large want to protect their reputation. And so they have an incentive to make sure that they're not putting out products that end up with so much bad press that it just hurts the company. Now, obviously, there are exceptions that we've seen to that. But I think by and large, as the broader society, we need to make it clear what the expectations are. But we also need to be able to have methods and standards and definitions and techniques in order to actually achieve those things. So when you say something like safety by design, that's great as a concept, but how do you actually do that in practice? And we can talk about this for almost any of these regulatory terms. And so that then gets us to the importance of the research and the standards and the benchmarks and the test beds, like the regulatory sandboxes and so forth, that help us actually do all of the testing to actually achieve these kinds of goals. in a way that we can agree will achieve the level of our expectations.
I see. That's interesting. As for the safety by design, it's indeed like a term that has been used for many other industries. I think the aviation or like aircraft manufacturing actually. And this is something that like the industry has come up with the answers to this. And here this is probably like one of the way. I just couldn't help but like to note like about the regulators that has been mentioned. This is not the tone that we have heard in Brussels. I don't think like companies have asked too much to be regulated. So perhaps we'll see whether they in the US like they say this, but then in private would lobby against any form of regulation. I suppose this might be one of the major lessons learned of the EU side, at least, is that there's extremely high level of lobbying around this aspect. But just wanted to have us like also look at the coordination, right? Like we have so many initiatives going on right now. This has been discussed on the previous panel as well. To both of you, actually, like how could we coordinate the approaches in a way that like kind of reflect a bit better or more holistically like the views of everyone, right? So not just like EU US, but like more at a global level. Like what's your take, your advice, or maybe your call to action as well on how to ensure that we coordinate better regulatory initiatives in a way that is more inclusive or more representative, at least, of preferences of citizens and consumers and vulnerable groups. Thank you. It's an easy one to finish with.
Yeah, this is a very easy one. I would like to talk about two things very quickly. One is about the gathering the evidence about the impacts, and the other is about enforcement. On the impacts, I think we just need an international effort to understand the impacts. We need basically kind of like, we need to go much further, deeper than just I'm putting in the inverted commas, for understanding the incidents. So going further in terms of having the database of the impacts, having a database or platform better, where researchers could cooperate to test their hypotheses, to have to match the different types of data, et cetera, et cetera. We just need much more international effort, because without the understanding the impacts, we don't understand what people might want actually to be regulated even. So we need to start there. So we need much better evidence base, and we need much more effort, and as well was said in the previous panel, kind of like independent scanning, but this needs to be networked in the plurality of scientific bodies and NGOs and others. On the enforcement, I think we should look for new models, how we ensure that what has been agreed here in DC, in Brussels, is actually well enforced at the same time globally in the countries which are willing to be part of that. Because they will lack the enforcement capacity. There's very little talk about enforcement, and coming from spending some time in the Commission on the enforcement on consumer protection law, this is super difficult to enforce oftentimes. So we need a new approach. One of my suggestions would be to learn how we've been able to maybe enforce gambling regulation, which builds sometimes on the notion that if the state is having the statute in their legal system, basically the entity has to comply everywhere globally where this is in the legal system. Otherwise, it's not compliant in your domestic jurisdiction. So if you have it as US, if you have it as the EU, this would make much easier enforcement, because the other countries will just lack the enforcement capacities. So to work on this, not only on the kind of like a minimum standard, but basically on the same standard, which is actually being implemented locally in other places of the world.
And so just briefly, I would say, I think, in this conversation, we're talking about the United States and the EU, but we've also heard about the Global South. And if you look at certain types of polls, they show that culturally, people around the world have very different views and concerns about AI. People in China, for instance, are much more optimistic about AI than the people in the United States or in most of Europe. And so I think what that means is that at the end of the day, we will be implementing implementing these high-level goals that we have all agreed on in different ways. But it comes back to how do we know that we've actually achieved those goals? And I think it comes back to the importance of standards and benchmarks and tests and methods and so forth, so that regardless of where we want to put what level of risk we're willing to put up with, we can at least measure it according to some standard. And that's something that we can work on and collaborate on very much, so that at least we can agree on how to measure these things.
Well, thank you very much. Unfortunately, time is up, and obviously this was a way too short panel for the extent of the topic. But thank you so much for your thoughts on this. I do see the value of evidence and gathering, converging on the benchmarks and all that. So I really appreciate that. This seems to be a first step, a low-hanging fruit for this. I believe Yolanda will now provide us with some closing remarks. Thank you so much.
Creep.